Good morning, Summit families. Happy Friday. Happy Summit Spirit Day. If you're wearing a Summit shirt, post it to our Facebook page and tag us. Tag Summit Schools. Hashtag, or I know if you do the little at Summit Schools, it will tag us. So, welcome back to Miss Rachel's Living Room. We are getting ready to read Chapter 2 in the Adventures According to Humphrey. If you are not familiar with who Humphrey is, he is this little guy on the boat. He is the classroom hamster of room 26 in Longfellow School. And we are reading number 5. Sorry, someone's having a fire outside. Nothing to worry about. I just saw smoke. So we're getting ready to read Chapter 2, Sink or Swim. And so here we go. Find a comfy spot, guys. Here's what I learned. A block of wood is heavier than a plastic bottle cap. Which one floats? Both. A piece of aluminum foil isn't nearly as heavy as a block of wood, but when you roll it up into a ball, it drops to the bottom of the water just like a small sunken ship. A ball of clay sinks like a great big shipwreck, and when you spread the foil out into the shape of a little boat, it floats, though I'm not sure I would try sailing in it. By golly, when you spread the clay out into a little boat, it floats too. I saw it with my own little hamster eyes, but when Mrs. Brisbane asked why the foil and the clay boats floated and the balls didn't, I was squeakless. So were my friends. Come on, try a guess, Mr. Fitch said in an encouraging voice. What was the question again? Asked Pay Attention Art Patel. Why did the foil and the clay boats float, but the balls didn't? Mrs. Brisbane patiently repeated. Art shrugged. You look like you have an answer, Mr. Fitch said to speak up Saya. I stood up extra high on my tippy toes to see what my shy friend had to say. Well, in a shy voice, I think it's because it's spread out and there's more water underneath it to hold the weight. Leave it to Saya to say something clever. I was so glad she wasn't too shy to speak up anymore. Bingo, said Mr. Fitch. Even though I thought Bingo was the name of a dog in a song, I knew he was telling her it was the right answer. It just had to be. There was more to whether something floats than just how much it weighs. Once again, I had learned something new, which is the amazing thing about school. But you don't just have to be in school to learn something cool. Let's try some more stuff, said Heidi without raising her hand again. I thought it was a great idea, but suddenly a loud voice that did not belong to AJ said, Excuse me for interrupting. I need to check the temperature. I recognized that voice right away. It was big, it was bossy, and of course it was the voice of Mrs. Wright. Who else but Mrs. Wright would be checking the temperature of the library? I wasn't even sick. Is something wrong, Mrs. Wright? The librarian asked. I believe the temperature control is not working properly, she said. And as the new chairperson of the committee for the school property, I need to keep track. Mrs. Wright taught physical education at Longfellow School. Thank goodness she didn't teach in room 26. In physical education, they play all kinds of games and sports which have rules. Mrs. Wright loves rules. Mrs. Wright loved her whistle. Mrs. Wright didn't love me. Come in, said Mr. Fitch. Mrs. Wright scurried across the room in her puffy white shoes. She headed for the temperature control on the wall. But before she reached it, her puffy white shoes stopped in the tracks next to the edge of my table. What is it doing in there? She asked huffily. It? Asked Mr. Fitch. What's an it? It's pretty clear what Mrs. Wright was talking about. The it was me, and she was staring straight at me. The rat, she said. Mrs. Brisbane quickly corrected her. Hamster. Whatever, Mrs. Wright replied. He doesn't belong in the library. Mr. Fitch smiled. Because he's not a book? Because he's out of his cage, and that's unsanitary. What about his waste? Where will that go? It was very quiet in the library until suddenly Kirk laughed. She means his poo, he said. The word poo started the rest of the class laughing out loud. Heidi and Gail giggled. Kirk and Richie rolled their eyes and elbowed at each other. Even Miranda and Saya chuckled. Mr. Fitch bit his lip while Mrs. Brisbane shook her head. My poo isn't part of life. My poo is just a part of life, but for some reason it makes the children giggle. And sometimes it makes grown-ups nervous. I don't know why, because I keep my poo far, far, far away from my food and everything else in my cage. In my view, you won't find a cleaner animal hamster. In my view, you won't find a cleaner animal than a hamster. Mrs. Brisbane took 2 steps towards Mrs. Wright. What a waste, she said. I don't see any waste. You know, said Mrs. Wright. Weren't you able to check the temperature? Asked Mrs. Brisbane. Mrs. Wright said, it does feel a bit chilly in here. I caught Mrs. Wright off guard. That's right, Mrs. Wright was caught off guard. Really? I thought it was a little warm, she said, hurrying towards the temperature control. While Mrs. Wright fiddled with the control, Mrs. Brisbane continued to talk to the class. Class, we'll be returning to room 26. But we'll be coming back soon because Mr. Fitch will be helping us with the new unit we're beginning, she said. I'll tell you a little about it later today. Surprisingly, Saya raised her hand. Mrs. Brisbane called on her right away. Could we please check out some books, she asked in her sweet, soft voice. Mrs. Brisbane and Mr. Fitch exchanged looks, and they both nodded. Okay, said Mr. Fitch. You've got 10 minutes. Did you ever cross your fingers and hope for something special? I don't actually have fingers, so I closed my eyes and crossed my toes, both sets, and made my wish. Wishes are funny. Most of the time, they don't come true. Sometimes they come true and you'd wish they hadn't. But once in a while, you make a wish and it happens to be a good thing. That's what happened in the library. I wish that Mrs. Brisbane would pick her pirate book up about Jolly Roger. I couldn't check it out because I didn't have a library card. And what do you know? She did! Yes, 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 I exclaimed as Garth carried me out in my hamster ball. I was so happy when I saw Mrs. Wright leaning over the temperature control as I left. She didn't even worry me anymore. Not very much anyway. My next wish came true after lunch when Mrs. Brisbane began reading that book to us. The full title of the story was Jolly Roger's Guide to Life. And it was about a boy and a girl, Violet and Victor, who are sent to spend the summer with their mysterious Uncle JR. You can imagine their surprise and mine when it turns out to be a pirate called Jolly Roger, and he decides to teach them about pirates too, and they set sail to find a lost pirate ship. My fur tingled. I was hanging on for every word when the teacher suddenly closed the book. The other students groaned, and I was unspeakably disappointed until Mrs. Brisbane said she wanted to tell us some exciting news. Og, did you hear that? I squeaked with delight. Exciting news! Boing! My neighbor answered in his odd, twangy voice that green frogs like him have, but it didn't sound particularly excited. The reason we have talked about what floats is tomorrow we'll be starting a project about sailing, she said. We'll be doing sailing problems in math and science, and you'll start building your own model sailboats. My friends murmured excitedly while Mrs. Brisbane paused and then cleared her throat. 3 weeks from tomorrow, if the weather is good, we'll go to Potter's Pond for a contest and see which one of the sailboats can get across the water first. We'll have a picnic and prizes and maybe, Mrs. Brisbane paused again, a hidden treasure. Potter's Pond, picnic, prizes, treasure? My heart pounded at the possibilities and my classmates' cheers were almost deafening. What are the prizes? Heidi asked. Raise your hand, Heidi, Mrs. Brisbane answered. The prizes will be a surprise. My friends groaned again. I let out a little bit of a squeak myself. By afternoon, Mrs. Brisbane had written her rules for the sailboat contest on the chalkboard. Number 1, each student will work with a partner. Number 2, the boat must be powered by the wind. No batteries or remote controls can be used. All the students will be given the same materials for their boats, but they will be allowed to add one item of their choosing except batteries. Materials will include wood, cardboard, cloth, paint, glue, markers, and other art supplies. 5, the first boat to make it from the starting point to the opposite shore of Potter's Pond will win the grand prize for most seaworthy. 6, there will be a prize for the most beautiful boat. At the end of the day, my friends were chattering away about the sailboats as they rushed out of class. Once the coast was clear, I shouted to my neighbor, "Og, did you hear that?" She said, "All students." I wonder if I didn't dare finish that thought. Most of the time, I did everything my friends in room 26 did, like taking tests and learning new things. Sometimes we even had games or parties, and I was right there with the rest of them. But sometimes I was left out. Recess, lunch, PE, field trips. Still, I could hope. I was so busy hoping I didn't realize it was nighttime until the door flew open. The lights came on and a familiar voice said, "Give a cheer, 'cause Aldo's here." "Greetings, Aldo," I answered as he wheeled his cleaning cart towards my cage. "Did you hear about the wonderful contest?" As usual, all that came out was squeak, squeak, squeak. I'm not sure if he understood me, but as he cleaned the room, he noticed the vocabulary words on the chalkboard and the rules for the contest on the other. "So, what are we working on, Humphrey?" he said in a hearty laugh. "I'd like to be a part of that." "Me too," I answered, and Og splashed wildly. "That gives me a great idea," Aldo announced. I waited breathlessly for him to say more. Instead, he started sweeping up the aisles of the classroom. Occasionally, I'd hear him chuckle, but I had no idea what he was thinking. "Squeak up," I finally insisted. "You see," Aldo answered, "all in good time." "What was that all about?" I asked Og after Aldo was gone. "Boing, boing," Og replied. Then he leaped into the water side of his tank. While he was splishing and splashing, I daydreamed about the life on the open sea, riding the waves, going up and down, up and down. I stopped thinking that way when my tummy got a little queasy. If I had a boat, I could sail the 7 seas. I could sail anywhere in the world. I could even sail off to Brazil, where Mrs. Mack lived. Miss Mack, she was my first human friend, and what a friend she was. She was full of life, and her bouncy black curls, her big happy smile, and her dark large eyes. She was so adventurous. She even took me on a bike ride once. At night, she liked to play the bongo drums. Life with Miss Mack was the best. Then she broke my heart when Mrs. Brisbane came back to room 26, and Miss Mack left for Brazil. A broken heart hurts a lot. She sent us letters and pictures, but it wasn't like seeing her every day. At first, I didn't think I'd ever speak to her again, but by now my heart wasn't exactly broken. It was just sprained. I'd be glad if I could see her again. I don't think Miss Mack meant to break my heart. I do think Miss Mack would be glad to see me again too. Funny how a book about pirates gets you thinking about all kinds of crazy things, even love. There be treasures of plenty in the deep if we dare to look. Let me read that one more time. There be treasures of plenty in the deep if we dare to look. From Jolly Roger's Guide to Life by I.C. Waters. That was the end of chapter 2. I can't wait to see what Humphrey does in chapter 3. He's such a sneaky little hamster. You guys have a great Friday. Enjoy the weekend, and I'm gonna get working on those snack videos. My banana bread didn't go so well, but I got some great ideas. Thanks, Oliver. I think our first opportunity will be some French toast. So again, great to hopefully see you guys. I hope parents are showing this to your kiddos, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye, guys.